What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Stronger TV. I am Kiefer Lammi, here with Dan Pope as always, and today we're talking about assessing your readiness and using your training journal. Let's go with it, Dan.
Let's go with it. I like to use a training journal a lot, and I think that we, as a fitness community and a physical therapy community, we understand that things like stress, sleep, nutrition are going to be very important in whether or not you progress from a performance perspective, but also whether or not you get injured. And the other part is that after you're injured, how you get out of pain in the future. All these variables are very, very important. Now, I think we know that, right? That makes sense. I think the big thing that we lack sometimes is a practical way to implement these things so that you can actually benefit from them over the course of time.
Sure.
What do you think, man?
Yeah, I think it's great. And I think it doesn't necessarily have to be for somebody that's coming back from an injury. I think this is a great thing to implement for anybody that's looking to take their fitness seriously, because all of these things will play a role in how you progress or how you feel on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you got it. I'm going to show you how I do this. This is not necessarily the best way, I wouldn't say. This is just what I've been tinkering with over the past few years. I do all of my training journaling inside of Google Docs. So I basically have every month saved, and at the start of every single session, I have these variables written down with a workout following afterwards, okay? And I'm going to try to take you through this stuff here. It's not that complicated. The first one is going to be my nutrition, and generally I put calories up here. For me, I'm a nutrition nut. I really care about nutrition. It's usually on point. The one variable about nutrition that can screw me up sometimes is how much I'm eating, right? So part of it is that if I'm chronically not eating enough, I know I'm going to start to lose some weight. I'm not going to be able to handle as much in the gym. I just have to make note of this. So if I do notice I've had a few days where I haven't been eating enough calories, I'll maybe taper down what I'm doing in the gym somewhat, cut down the intensity somewhat, or at least I'll have an idea why my lifts maybe aren't improving, and I say, okay, it's not necessarily the program the problem here, it's probably the nutrition is not going to be the issue here. What are your thoughts with that one, Keith?
No, I think that's great. And I think the important thing with this, and we'll see this is kind of the important thing with all of these things, is that Dan's not talking about on one given day writing down that his calories were 500 calories lower and saying immediately that like his training's going to suck or that things are going downhill, right? What he's doing is he's using this daily to provide himself with a trend, and he might see that over the course of 5 days, if he's chronically below the level that he knows is at his baseline for nutrition, that he might see some performance drops, right? So we're just trying to get this trend, get the information so that we know what's going on with our training.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm a bit of a nut. I've been counting my calories for years and years now, probably since I was about 15 or 16. Nutrition is so important for progress in the gym and also for rehabilitation. I recommend most people learn how to do this in some way, whether that's kind of macronutrient or just counting your calories in general. Once you have an idea of how much you're eating on a regular basis, it's actually not that hard to do, and I just ballpark it every single day. So what I have here is 3,300, and this would basically, let's say I'm training today, right? Let's say it's a Wednesday, and this would be how many calories I had on Tuesday, all right? So it gives me an idea of how much I'm eating, right? And if my maintenance level is about 3,300 and I want to maintain, great, I'm where I need to be. If I'm trying to lose weight, I look at that number, I'm like, wow, I'm a little high there, I need to work on that. So it's a little reminder for me to just do a better job, I guess, and keep me accountable from a day-to-day basis, right?
Sure. What else we got?
We got sleep, right? So sleep obviously is very, very important. It's one of those things where it's going to help us get out of pain. It's going to help us progress faster in the gym, recover better. So many important things come from sleep, right? On average, we're looking for somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night. I think the big thing is that everyone probably needs a little less, a little bit more. And if you start to record how much sleep you're getting and start tweaking your sleep from a nightly basis, you might find improvements in a lot of parts of your life, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So what I end up doing is I write how much sleep I had the night before, right? And I, just like Kiefer said, it's not all about how much you sleep just in one night. It's about the entire week. But the other part is if you're seeing it on a regular basis, you can actually see these trends over the course of time. The other thing is if I have like a crap sleep night and I just do terrible, I'll write how many hours I got. Let's say it's like 5.5 or 6, and afterwards I'll just write, yeah, I slept too early, or I went to bed too late on the weekends, and then Sunday night came along and I just couldn't get to sleep. Terrible quality of sleep, and also I just didn't get many hours. And that's probably going to reflect what I do in the training that day. I'll probably cut a set or two off. I'll maybe drop the intensity just a little bit, just to make sure I don't get hurt, and progress where my body's at the moment. Yeah. Anything to add with the sleep part of that?
No, I think that's super helpful, right? I think just like the rest of these, this is now a tool that you can use to kind of auto-regulate your training for the day, right? You say, all right, sleep was a little bit low, not eating quite as much. Maybe today's a day that, I cut 5% off of my top sets for the day, or maybe today's a day that I do 2 sets of my accessory work instead of 3, right? Small adjustments that you're making just to meet you where you're at, because long-term that you're still gonna make progress forward if you do that, versus burying yourself into a hole.
Boom, good one, I like that. Next one, and probably one of my favorite ones recently, is thinking about stress. Stress is absolutely enormous, has so much importance. I mean, if you haven't really looked into this too much and want to learn more about stress and how it affects every facet of our life, I'd probably look into Robert Sapolsky's stuff, Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. It's a phenomenal book, and it'll just teach you just how bad having a lot of stress in your life can be, right? So it's one of those things we definitely have to keep an eye on a regular basis. So what I do is I look at my stress from a positive and also a negative perspective, all right? And to be honest, I try to reflect on this every single day outside of this training journal, and I just put kind of the bullet points in my training journal, because it can actually be a ton of different things, and it can be a pretty long list, and it's probably a little much for just a training journal. But I'll put some positive things. So let's say the evening prior, had a really relaxing evening, maybe I went out with my wife, you know, it was very relaxing, I felt great. I'm gonna put that in my journal, because that's a positive stress, probably puts me in a better place, helps me kind of calm down, relax, and improves every part of my life. The negative stress would be something like, let's say I actually had a blowout argument with my wife the night prior, right? That's probably not going to be very helpful. The other thing is that if I'm doing excessive amounts of work, which is kind of what I'm doing currently, I know that if I've been doing that for several days or several weeks, I probably have to be careful with my training. So if I'm not feeling so hot and I know that I have a lot of extra stress, a lot of extra work, I'm going to dial back on my training slightly.
Yeah, no, I like it. I got nothing to add there. I think you killed
Excellent.
it.
Killed it.
What's our next one here?
Next one's readiness. So this is a little weird one. I kind of made this one up myself, although I'm sure a lot of other people probably use it. I'm not sure if you use this scale at all.
Yeah, a little bit. Yep.
Basically, when I get to the gym, how ready do I feel to attack the weights, right? A lot of people will use, let's say, like a hand grip dynamometer to see where their strength is at the moment. They'll use something like heart rate variability to kind of figure out how ready they are. A lot of times I just write how good I feel. Sometimes I get in the gym and I'm like, I'm ready to smash it. I'm ready to go as hard as I can in the gym. I feel great. Other times I'm like sitting there doing like thoracic spine extensions for like 15 minutes, just like don't feel like getting things started whatsoever. And I think this readiness scale kind of helps with that a little bit. So where I start, and to be honest, I'm somewhere between a 6 and 7 at all times. Every once in a while I get to around a 7 or an 8 out of 10, and sometimes I'm down by a 5. But this is a big thing I take into account for what I do that day from a training perspective. So if I'm down in the dumps and I feel like crap, I'm just not going to push it as much in my training, right? But if I feel phenomenal, I'm going to push it a little bit harder. So.
I think this is super interesting, and I think that people get overwhelmed by stuff like this sometimes because they think that they have to understand like what the perfect number is and stuff, right? And I think what's cool about this is that, all right, you've decided that a scale out of 10 is what works for you, right? And you've been doing this so long, you know kind of like your baseline is somewhere around a 7, right? So if you feel pretty good, right, but not like phenomenal, maybe you're at a 6.5 or a 7. If you feel crappy, you're at a 5 or a 6. You feel awesome, you might be at an 8, right? And that's how you've determined your trend over time.
I know.
Well, for somebody else, their like baseline might be an 8, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that different numbers are wrong. You can't get this stuff wrong. It's just about getting a feel for how you are on a daily basis over time, right?
Yeah.
You could very well use a 1 to 3 scale where, you know, 2's your baseline, 3's if I feel awesome, 1's if I don't feel so good.
Yeah.
Right? But having some way to kind of establish your baseline and be able to see your trends over time, I think is helpful for you to make progress there.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's actually something I was thinking about the other day because I just kind of randomly chose the 0 out of 10, and I chose like a 6 to 7. I'm like, looking at it the other day, I feel like I'm a 6 out of 10. I'm like, that seems bad. Like 6 is not very high, right? Am I always chronically like in the crapper, or what's the deal? But yeah, you're right. It's kind of a subjective thing that you get from a regular basis and see where your normal is over the course of time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
The other thing about this readiness scale is sometimes I feel like dump when I start my workout, and then I start rolling into it, and I just feel phenomenal. So every once in a while, after I put in my day at the beginning of my training journal, afterwards I'll say, this really improved. I felt phenomenal. I actually pushed a bit harder. So it's not always a static number. A lot of times it does improve over the course of the workout, something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dan, before we move on, I do want to go back to stress. I apologize, I didn't have a comment before, but
no problem.
I think that with stress, with training, we tend to kind of separate life stress from our training stress, right? And what you're kind of talking about here is, you know, your examples were all about work and about your relationships and stuff, right? And these are not things related to your training.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that we realize how related all of these things are, because your body doesn't necessarily recognize stresses as being different. They don't recognize like hard sessions from a fight with your wife, from a fight with your boss, from all these other things, right?
Yeah.
So being able to put this together and say like, all right, there are stresses in my life, and every time I add a stressor, that's filling up this cup, right?
Yeah.
And either I'm gonna eventually spill over, right? Or I need to take away a little bit of stress somewhere else, right? So you have this tethering balance of like, all right, how hard can I push my training versus how hard can I push my life and everything else,
yeah.
right? And so I think this is where you have that opportunity to do that, because you already have your training written down here, right?
Yeah.
But if you go through and you're like, hey, stress is higher than normal in these areas, you have to be able to make these adjustments after the fact.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, honestly, we could do an entire stronger TV episode on this probably, but a lot of times exercise is something that decreases stress too. But the thing is, if you're doing 30 minutes of steady state exercise or something that's not very high intensity, that's probably great for relieving stress. But if you're doing I don't know, you're doing a really tough Metcon, or you're doing some really, really heavy sets, multiple sets, it's gonna be pretty draining, and it takes a lot to amp you up for that. So if you have a really tough workout, then okay, I'm gonna have to take that back down again. But if you have the opportunity to make that portion of your workout that actually is more relaxing in nature a little bit bigger, then that might be helpful too, because now you're managing your stress. It's not necessarily that stress is bad, it's just that we have to use the right stress for that day based on how you feel.
Sure. I think this is something we see, a lot with some of our friends that are gym owners, right? People that open gyms tend to be people that were super passionate about fitness, or they were a really competitive CrossFit athlete or powerlifting athlete or something else, right? So they're used to training really hard. They go to open a gym. They added this massive stress into their life. They're probably sleeping a little bit less. Everything changes, and now the training starts to go downhill, right? And so, it's just an example of how when you totally increase the stress somewhere else, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to run yourself into a wall trying to keep your training at the same level, right? And it's probably going to negatively affect you, or you have to be okay with making some adjustments in the short term, right? Whether that's, the intensity or the volume or the frequency of your training to kind of meet yourself where you're at, so you can still make steady progress forward.
For sure. And I think the other thing that's really important to understand is, let's say that you are very stressed out now, you just opened a gym, your level of stress went from here to here, and you previously were doing this much training, right? And that was optimal for you because you were recovering really well, right? Now, because you have so much stress in your life, what's probably optimal for you might be a little bit lower. So if you cut a set or two off, it may feel like you're doing less, but in reality, you have a dosage over the course of time, you'll probably make more progress. And if you try to keep that crazy volume and intensity, it will keep you kind of going down over the course of time because it's just too much stress.
Sweet, I love it. All right, let's get to this last point. What do you got here?
All right, last one here is acute to chronic workload ratio. This has been developed by Tim Gabbett, great researcher. He's actually come this weekend, a champion. It's gonna be phenomenal. We're gonna learn more from him. But basically what we're trying to do is quantify how much work we did on a given day, right? So what we do is we use an RPE scale, rate of perceived exertion, about how tough you thought the workout was for that day, right? So let's say that you had an intermediate moderate workout. I rate the entire workout about a 6 out of 10 in terms of intensity or how challenging it was, all right? So I had this 6 out of 10 right here. And you multiply that by the duration in minutes. Let's say it was 60 minutes. So you have 6 times 60, 36, 360 is your number for that day, right? So let's say throughout the course of the week, on average, you have, let's say 500. You train 5 days that week. That's 2,500. That would be your weekly number for how hard the week was, basically. And what we're looking for is that, are we having any spikes in our training volume that are putting me above that number, right? Either on a daily basis. So if I have a workout that's way above 500, that may put me more at risk for injury, right? Or if I have one week that's way more challenging than the prior weeks, that may put me more at risk for injury. And the other piece is if you notice wow, I've had a lot of really challenging days in the past week or so, then the following week, let's maybe dial it back a little bit, because I might be destined for failure unless I dial back. I got to follow that super compensation curve, right? Really push it and then dial back so you can recover and your strength goes up.
Sure. Yeah. And in the same effect, using myself as an example, I was just sick for a week, right? And I haven't trained for almost 7 days, right? So my workload for that last 7-day period was 0, right? So if I go back to the gym and I try to jump back to what I was doing, relative to what I did the week before, that's a giant spike in my workload, right? So you have to be able to do this on both ends and say all right, I might be able to make a 10, 20, or 30% jump up in training, workload from week to week, and then I drop back a little bit after. But if I drop back 100% my workload, I might have to bump back to maybe only 50% of that, and then go back to my baseline after the fact, right? And that's how we try and build long-term success versus continuing to have these periods where you kind of push really hard, ram yourself into a wall, push really hard, ram yourself into a wall.
Yeah, good point there, Kiefer. Kiefer's actually a warrior right now because his uvula, you can't see it, is the size of a golf ball. And it's getting stuck in the back of his throat every time he takes a breath in. So good job, Kiefer, today for doing the Stronger TV episode.
I appreciate you telling everybody this for us.
Yeah, sorry. Yep. So that's pretty much all I got, guys. I guess what I will say is that we want to have an objective way to measure these things. We know that they're important. The system is not necessarily the best, but it allows you to start tracking these variables so that we can start making better progress in the gym, decrease our risk of injury, and if we have an injury, these things are also super important for getting out of pain as well.
Awesome. All right, guys, I think that's it for this episode. If you like this one, make sure you like it, comment on it for us, subscribe for future episodes, and make sure you share it with your friends.